So, the iPhone 8. Let's talk about the iPhone 8. So, when it comes to the iPhone 8, we pretty much know every single thing. So we know everything from the exact design style with those almost non-existent bezels. We know the exact specs of the iPhone 8, all the main features such as wireless charging, that 3D front-facing camera, then Face ID for unlocking the phone and authorizing Apple Pay payments, all of which, by the way, I've covered in this video. But there was one thing, one major thing, which we knew nothing about. Well, actually not that much about, and that was the camera. So there you go, a full iPhone 8 Leaks and Rumor episode dedicated just to the camera. So as always, grab some popcorn. Actually, you know what's better than grabbing some popcorn? Watching this video in 60 frames per second. So this video is actually 4K at 60 frames per second. So definitely watch it in 4K at 60 if you can, or at least 1080p at 60. Definitely change the frame rate to 60p because we'll need it for this one. And that's about it. So yeah, enjoy. Okay, so the iPhone 8's camera. Here's everything that we currently know. So starting off with number one, we have the back-facing camera. So the visual changes on the back-facing camera. The main and the most obvious change would be the fact that the camera is now vertical. So this doesn't actually affect the visual quality at all, since basically the camera data is flippable in the operating system. So yeah, it's just vertical. However, what's definitely going to be noticeable are the two camera modules. So as you can see, now there's a much greater distance between the two modules than compared to what we had on the iPhone 7 Plus, especially with that True Tone flash now being in the middle. In the end, what this means is that depth mapping would work much better than on the iPhone 7 Plus, since you have a much greater distance between the two shots that those two cameras would actually take. Now, obviously, this would depend on the actual aperture opening. One of the lenses is still going to be a wide-angle lens, and then the other one is still going to be a telephoto lens. There's also a tiny hole that we've seen embedded into the dual camera module. Now, we've seen this in quite a few mock-ups, and even on that iPhone 8 clone that I've covered in one of my previous videos. At first I thought that that was supposed to be the microphone, but it's most likely not both an IR transmitter and an IR receiver, since the opening is way too small. My guess is that this might actually be a transmitter, and then the receiver being one of the two camera modules on the back. Now, obviously, this would mean that the cameras would need to be modified in order to support this, but yeah, either way, an IR sensor is expected on the back-facing camera on the iPhone 8, not just on the front. Okay, now when it comes to the actual specs of the back-facing camera, a big change, or one of the main changes actually, would be the inclusion of OIS, or optical image stabilization, on both camera modules. So currently on the iPhone 7 Plus, we only have OIS, or optical image stabilization, on the main lens, so the wide-angle module, which means that if you switched to the telephoto lens, or if you basically zoomed in twice, you would not only get much worse performance in low light, but the shots will actually be pretty shaky. And this will finally be fixed on the iPhone 8. Now, when it comes to the actual camera specs, we don't really expect any big changes on the back-facing camera. So 12 megapixel resolution, so same as on the iPhone 7, the iPhone 7 Plus, and even the iPhone 6s. Dual camera module, speaking of this, the iPhone 6s Plus would also come with a dual camera module, but the regular iPhone 7s would only come with a single camera module, just like on the iPhone 7. So the iPhone 7s Plus and the iPhone 8 would both have a dual camera module. Now, when it comes to the aperture, this is most likely going to be f1.7 at most. So currently on the iPhone 7 we have f1.8. Then on the Samsung Galaxy S8 we have f1.7, which is actually one of the main reasons why the S8 is actually better in low light than the iPhone 7 and the iPhone 7 Plus. But yeah, don't expect anything better than f1.7 on the iPhone 8. Hopefully f1.7. I would say f1.8, just like on the iPhone 7. Most likely. And that would actually be on the main lens. So the wide angle lens, not a telephoto one. On the telephoto lens, it would actually have a smaller aperture. So f2.8 is what we had on the iPhone 7 Plus. So this might be increased to f2.5 or 2.1 at most likely 2.5. Now, when it comes to the sensor size on the iPhone 8, this is most likely going to be increased. So currently we have 1/3 inches sensor on the iPhone 7 and iPhone 7 Plus. This is most likely going to be increased to about 1/2.5 inches to 1/2.8, which would actually put it into the Samsung Galaxy S8's territory, when it comes to low light. So hopefully this is going to happen, because low light on the iPhone 7 is good, but it can definitely be much, much better. Okay, so we've seen the specs. Now what about the features on the back-facing camera? Now when it comes to the features on the back-facing camera, we don't have anything too special here. So that's because the cameras on the iPhone 8, well, they're full of unique features, but most of them are actually on the front-facing camera. Now there is one major feature that's coming to the back-facing camera, and that's actually most likely going to be 4K video at 60 frames per second. Yeah, 60 frames per second. This would be a first for pretty much any phone. Now, the hint for this was actually found in the latest HomePod firmware, which actually leaked a ton of details regarding the iPhone 8. One of them being this line of code here showing 4K at 60 frames per second capabilities for both the front and the back-facing camera. And if you take a look at this line here, so the one on the top, we can even see HEVC encoding for up to 4K at 60 frames per second. So that's actually H.265. Yeah, 4K at 60 would be double the frame rate. So just to give you an idea, this is a 4K 60 frames per second video, or 60p video that you're watching right now, if it's 1080p or 720p. And this is 4K or 720p or 1080p at 30. So again, 60, look at my hand movement, and now this is 30. Again, look at my hand movement. 4K at 60 frames per second is going to be incredible. I mean, this is something that you don't even find on budget level cameras, especially when it comes to Canon. Yeah, Canon, we're all looking at you. Nowadays, we have quite a few smartphones that can do 4K at 30, but the iPhone 8 would actually be the first to do 4K at 60 frames per second, which is just crazy. Yeah, I mean, the cheapest, if you take a look at DSLR cameras or mirrorless cameras, the cheapest one that can do 4K at 60 would be the Panasonic GH5, and that's like $2,000, $3,000. It's about in that range. So this is going to be amazing for filmmakers, as long as obviously you have enough light. So pretty excited for that. I mean, in the end, all you need to record 4K at 60 frames per second is one, a 4K sensor. So this would actually be a sensor with 8.3 megapixels, or a higher sensor, high resolution sensor. Number two would be a powerful processor in order to process obviously so many frames in such a high resolution per second. And then number three would also be a really fast internal storage that can save so many frames in such a high resolution, again, per second. And the iPhone 7 already has all of these. So it does come with a really powerful Apple A10 processor. And this is just a beast. I mean, it's so powerful that it even outperforms Core i5 processors from 1 to 2 years ago. And yeah, even Haswell i7s for that matter. It's just crazy. And since the Apple 11 chip is going to be even more powerful than the Apple A10, and that's because it's finally going to be based on a smaller 10nm process, then definitely it's going to be capable to record 4K at 60 frames per second. Now, 4K video, even at 30 frames per second, takes a ton of space. So when you record at 60, it's obviously going to take double the amount of space. Now, along with 4K at 60, we're also expecting to see finally an iCloud storage bump. So currently we only have 5 gigabytes of free storage, which is, I mean, this is just a joke, considering that Google basically offers you a limited storage, even though it's basically up to 12 megapixels and up to 1080p video. This was, by the way, just updated like a few months ago, I think. It was 8 megapixels and 1080p. Now it's 12 megapixels and 1080p. I've actually switched to Google Photos from Apple Photos entirely just because of this, and multiple reasons actually. But yeah, Google Photos is much, much better than Apple Photos, and Apple is expected to be improving Apple Photos quite a lot, and especially iCloud storage with the iPhone 8. And finally, when it comes to the features of the back-facing camera on the iPhone 8, just as I mentioned before, one of them is going to be most likely an infrared sensor on the back-facing camera. So we are expecting to see an infrared sensor on the front-facing camera, and that's because Apple is going to be focusing a lot on AR in iOS 11. And AR would actually benefit a lot from an infrared sensor, since you can actually measure depth, which is not, I mean, it's possible even if you don't have an infrared sensor, but it's much more difficult. So since we are going to have one on the front-facing camera, I would say that it's most likely going to be there on the back-facing one as well. But by far the most exciting and also the biggest feature when it comes to the cameras on the iPhone 8 is not going to be AR or 3D cameras or anything like that. It might just be this one, and that's smart camera. The smart camera what's this? Well, the recently released HomePod firmware actually shows quite a few lines of code on this. So we have Smart Cam, we have scene document, so Smart Cam scene document, scene fireworks, scene foliage, scene sky, scene pet, and so much more. So what this means is that the iPhone's camera would be actually able to distinguish between different environments. Sort of like you have like multiple camera modes on a DSLR. So for example, you have the landscape photography mode, you have the portrait, and so on. You have the fast motion. So for example, if it detects a landscape shot, it would most likely be able to increase the vibrancy, and for a portrait, it could simply make the portrait look much more natural. And a few more lines of code from the HomePod firmware actually show the iPhone 8's camera being able to detect different mouth positions, such as closed, upper lip, down, and so much more. So there's quite a few mentions of also freeze motion. Now, what's freeze motion? Well, this is most likely a function that basically allows the iPhone 8's camera to detect a fast-moving object, so that it automatically increases the shutter speed, it takes multiple shots, and then it selects the sharpest one automatically without you having to do anything. So yeah, there's a ton of big features coming to the iPhone 8's back-facing camera. So what about the front-facing camera? This is going to be actually an even bigger change than the back one. And as you can see, the back one is already a pretty big change on the iPhone 8. Okay, so front-facing camera specs. What do we know about front-facing camera? Well, from the HomePod firmware that I mentioned before, we also know that the front-facing camera is also going to be able to record 4K in 60 frames per second video, not just the back-facing camera. And this is huge because of so many reasons. So first off, the iPhone 7 was actually limited to 1080p video on the front-facing camera, even though it had a 7 megapixel resolution camera, and then the Samsung Galaxy S8 comes with 8 megapixels, and it can do up to Quad HD. So the iPhone 7 could essentially do Quad HD as well, but for some reason, Apple knows why, they limited to 1080p. And basically with 4K at 60 frames per second, this won't just be the first front-facing camera on an iPhone that can do 4K, but also the first one that can do 60 frames per second. So yeah, this obviously means that the resolution on the front-facing camera is going to be increased as well. And that's because for 4K, you actually need 8.3 megapixels. So the 7 megapixel camera that we have on the iPhone 7 won't be able to do 4K. So 8.3 megapixels is most likely going to be the minimum resolution that we're going to see on the iPhone 8. So I would say that most likely a 9 or a 12 megapixel front-facing camera on the iPhone 8 is going to be the actual resolution. And hopefully this is also a wide-angle lens as well, hopefully. Now, when it comes to the features on the front-facing camera, we're finally going to see quite a lot of features, even more features actually than on the back-facing camera. So one of them being Face ID, so the ability to actually unlock your phone and also authorize Apple Pay payments by simply using your face. So this is basically the replacement for Touch ID. This is going to replace Touch ID entirely. Now, for all of this to be possible, we're also getting quite a few new sensors. So one of them being an iris sensor. We've seen quite a few leaks that show actually 2 iris sensors. Then we're also getting an IR or an infrared transmitter and an infrared receiver as well. In case you want to know more about how the front-facing camera would work and all the sensors and everything and how Face ID would actually work, I've done an in-depth video just on that in case you want to know more details about front-facing camera, about Face ID, and about Touch ID being replaced with Face ID, and yeah, Touch ID being removed completely. And yeah, quite a lot of new features coming to the front-facing camera and also the back-facing camera on the iPhone 8. So what do you guys think about all these changes, all these updates, and what do you guys think about Apple not increasing the resolution, for example, on the back-facing camera and just adding more features on the front one, improving the specs on the front camera and focusing more on AR rather than the actual, I don't know, resolution or maybe even the actual quality of the back-facing camera? I think the iPhone 8s is going to come with some pretty big improvements next year, but for now, this is still one of the biggest camera changes we've ever seen in an iPhone, especially when it comes to the front-facing one. But yeah, other than that, if you want to see more iPhone 8 coverage, feel free to subscribe to my channel. It's free. And don't forget to enable notifications so that you're actually notified whenever I upload a brand new epic video. You can do that by simply tapping on that bell icon next to my channel. And in case you've missed my iPhone 8 clone unboxing and my iPhone 8 prototype hands-on review, definitely check out those videos as well. They're pretty interesting. Other than that, let me know in the comments if you were epic enough to make it until the end of this video by saying I was epic enough to make it until the end of this video. But yeah, other than that, feel free to give a like if you have enjoyed it, so let me know. And I'm Daniel, and that's pretty much it. I'll see you guys in my next one. Back, signing out. Cheers.